Yeah, the one thing that Canadians can do today is to share accessibility information of the spaces that they frequent, because one of the biggest barriers to access for people is not having the right information as to whether they can get in or whether they'll be ASL or LSQ at events or in different public or private spaces. So something that's quite simple is you can look up online like some of the simple accessibility audits and then just go around and make it a fun event with your friends or just do it yourself. It takes about half an hour and it can really help people. So, yeah.
They can engage in democracy. And what I mean by that is that regardless of their particular issues that they care about, be that the women's movement or climate change or reconciliation or the racism that we're starting to see bubble up in some terrible ways, they need to speak out about it and work towards it and try to do something about it every day.
I think the most important thing Canadians can do is to get out and actually experience Canada. You know, it's remarkable. Canadians travel all over the world. They go to some of the most remote corners of the planet, but many Canadians have never seen, as an example, the Arctic or never seen Newfoundland. So I think it's really important that Canadians explore Canada. There's so much to see. It's a huge part of the world's geography, world's landmass, and start to understand the cultures and the environment better.
Well, firstly, one of the more important things that one can do would be to encourage others to be politically active. And by that I don't mean partisan in a partisan way necessarily, although it often leads to that. But be aware of what's happening in the country. Be aware of what political leaders are doing. Be in the frame of mind where you want to hold people accountable about decisions they make. And also to step out yourself if the time comes and you can show leadership in whatever organization that you participate in. Take the risk, get engaged, be held accountable by others. It's all the dialogue is good, and the debate that takes place between citizens is what makes the country healthy. The other thing I would think you can do is to talk to children. I have to admit that I didn't do a lot of that in my adult life. I was engaged in nominally adult debates, and in some ways missed the opportunity to speak to my own children. And now that I have grandchildren, I can only tell you that it's one of the great joys of my life to be talking to children about engagement, about the world, about what matters, about values. It's all something that helps keep the country healthy. And if you take the time to do it, then the country can only be better for it.
I think there are two things that Canadians can do today to make the country better. Number one is to continue to pressure our politicians to redress the historic wrongs done to Aboriginal people and to improve the situation of Aboriginal people in Canada. But secondly, we need to figure out a way for average Canadians to be involved. So we're not just sitting back expecting the politicians to do it. We can also be engaged in making the future better.
One thing that Canadians can do right now that will help Canada in the future is talk to your youth, because it's their future as well. And they're the ones that are probably going to be taking over your job, everybody else's job, but they're going to have to fix your mistakes, so try to make less mistakes for one. But get what they want, because that's how they want things to work, because of a reason, usually to make it better, so that we can communicate and so that we can cooperate. And that's something that's pretty overlooked, and I think people should see the value in it.
I think the one thing that Canadians can do to make Canada a better place in the future is to take the successes we've already had in mainstream Canada and bring them into Indigenous communities. One of them would be something like quality improvement. Made huge transformation in Medicare. If we took the same principles and applied them in our Indigenous communities, I think you'd see transformational change.
I think one thing that we could do is become more comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. Canadians today are so nervous about saying the wrong thing, asking the wrong questions, that it's really impeding our ability to glean information and develop understanding.
I think the one thing we can do is to listen to one another, talk about the issues that matter to us, what we're passionate about, what we see are major issues that we're all dealing with, challenges, and engage in a way that's open-hearted and meaningful so that we can have these difficult conversations and then build the Canada we want together.
We can focus on the people who are being excluded from our society for reasons of poverty, who cannot really participate in a constructive way, who have a series of bad outcomes in their lives because of poverty, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of substance abuse. 15% of our population is living beneath the poverty line. 85% of our guests of Her Majesty in our prisons are from that 15%. There's a series of very serious costs that we are not addressing, and we could deal with that in the way we have dealt with other problems which involved focus, coherence, and thinking about the other person's circumstance. That's really what Canada has to do. We have to eradicate the level of poverty, which is way too high for a country like ours. We have to innovate in terms of how we do it. We can't do it the way we've always done it because we haven't succeeded. There are still too many poor people in this country. Close to 3 million of our fellow Canadians live beneath the poverty line. We can do it more efficiently, more effectively. We have to push our politicians not to settle for what they've always done, but in fact to innovate and do it constructively and effectively.
But for quite a few years now, I've been wondering how we can improve our cultural awareness in Canada. I came to Canada in '63 from the UK, and I was immediately accepted, of course, because I was white. I came from the Commonwealth. I spoke funny, and I got a lot of ridicule, but I had no awareness that there was a cultural difference in Canada until I came to Saskatchewan in 1975. And over the years, I've got to know more and more non-white people, and it's just a joy. But as our population, and I think about the settlers as Red, they survived because they cooperated with their neighbours and their Indigenous neighbours. And quite frankly, I don't think we've ever thanked the Indigenous people for that. But that's what, the early settlers, that's what held them together, this cooperation. And I'm just wondering, as our population is getting more and more diverse in Saskatchewan and other parts of the country, are we really aware that most of us are ignorant of the customs and beliefs and characteristics of people from outside Canada? So I don't have an answer, but I think some national program, maybe starting in the schools, to build cultural awareness in our youngsters first, and maybe going to other higher ages later on. I think that could be a really valuable addition to the integrity and the whole characteristic of Canada.
I think one thing that could have been done in the past as well too is to acknowledge the treaties. So the treaties that were made between Indigenous people here in Canada and with the Canadian government. I think that moving forward with that and looking at the spirit and intent of the treaties is something that is important and needs to be acknowledged.
For the future, we must get rid of the Indian Act, which is apartheid and genocide. It is a crime against humanity, and it lessens the dignity of every Canadian citizen who participates in the laws that govern it. So we have to have the opportunity where everyone has a right for their voice and a right for their land. And we must realize that Indigenous people are completely and totally connected to the land. They are the land. They don't come from Canada, they are Canada.
Canadians can actually tackle a barrier that stands in the way of people with disabilities from achieving their full potential and being fully included in Canadian society. It matches our charter and our constitution, and of course what they can do is use disability as the unifying force between all diverse sectors of Canadian society, because it doesn't know any boundaries, and we need things that we can work on together as a country to make us stronger and to build the Canada we want.
One thing Canadians can do today that will make things better for tomorrow is they can learn about the territory, the traditional territory that their community is on, and check up on the people that that territory is represented by. If you live in Anishinaabe territory, check up on the Anishinaabe people and ask how are their families, how are their children, and ensure that the Indigenous communities who are the protectors of the land that we live on are respected in the same way that we as Canadians of every other stripe expect.
I believe that Canadians can make university education available to every bright young Canadian that has the ability to go to university and learn and succeed, and that we should do that without regard to race, color, creed, gender, and I think that would make Canada a far better country. It's already a great country. It would make us even better.
Canadians need to be curious. They need to wonder about the people who are like them and the people who aren't like them. They need to go look at their Facebook settings and see how Facebook profiles them. They need to ask questions about how our policies are being developed. Being curious will open so many new doors.
I'm going to say listen to each other and really listen to each other. And not only to hear another person's point of view, but to consider that you may have something to learn. Something you hadn't thought of before, something that as you were growing up in this country wasn't taught, or maybe wasn't taught correctly. I believe if people are open to really honestly understanding others' points of views, and I believe we are as Canadians, I think that's our strength as a country. I've always felt that about Canada. But sometimes in this day and age, it's easy for people to really stop listening and to create our social circles smaller and smaller. And I think that we will be stronger moving forward if we consider what we have to offer when we speak and what we have to learn when we really listen.
But I think it's a matter of consciousness. We have to accept that the single most important issue in the country today is the position and place of Indigenous people. That there are a long list of unresolved issues. It's not just reconciliation. It's not about the apology. It's about restitution and reconciliation, and remembering that the country is built on a triangular foundation: Indigenous, Francophone, Anglophone, and all the waves of people who came in. And that Indigenous foundation needs to be as strong as it can be. It's not about numbers. It's about the role. And it's not for us to be telling anybody what to do, but we need to be there, ready to be allies, ready to push our governments to spend the money, because just as it costs money to support Francophones, it costs money to support public schools, it's going to cost money to help the Indigenous people get the place that they deserve, and the money which they have not been given in the past, where they've been underfunded. And I would add to that a second thing, which is this whole country, at its best, was built on imagination and enormous risk and big conceptual ideas. Yeah, the railway, public school, we couldn't afford it, public health care, we couldn't afford it. You go through the list. We were always leaping ahead of what we could actually do. And that has been lost since, I would say, the late 80s. We have to get out of the utilitarian and back into this idea that Canada is a place built on great leaps and great pieces of conceptual imagination. And the first one today is the place of the Indigenous people.
We absolutely have to encourage the learning of Indigenous languages, something we've never done before. And I see all those programs that encourage people to learn Russian or German or whatever, which is fine. But we should learn our own Indigenous languages. If we had 100 young men and women who would put their mind to it, I'm sure we would better national unity, and we would feel better as a country.
Recycle more.
Go out and vote.
I think we need, as a country, we need a more inclusive and responsive democracy. And in order to get there, I think anybody who's watching this is likely somewhat engaged. So go out and find a friend, find somebody in your network that's maybe not as engaged as you are, and sit down and have a real personal conversation about government and our democracy.
The one thing that I think Canadians can do today to make it better for the future is to be brave enough to have really difficult conversations about the things that we often keep silent or feel awkward talking about in Canada. So one thing that immediately comes to mind is racism. It's a difficult conversation. It's not something that a lot of people feel comfortable having, particularly if they don't generally have it. They often feel like they're going to say the wrong thing. But I think there is a hunger and a need to start talking about a lot of the things that have been lying within our everyday interactions and have been existing for a really long time, and I've actually helped to shape a lot of what makes Canada the way that it is today. And the time has come for us to have these conversations. There are some really amazing media opportunities that have opened up, like the Color Code podcast through the Globe and Mail, social networking spaces like Twitter. But I think being brave enough to ask questions, to have these conversations, to research some of these topics is really integral, because we are a diverse nation. We're one of the first, I think we were the first nation to ever have an official policy of multiculturalism. We are a nation made up of people who are coming from all different places, who have a really rich and diverse indigenous communities that are a part of this land and have taught us so much and continue to teach us so much. And I think that it is integral for us to be able to talk about the ways that the society is structured so that so much of those experiences and so many of those stories are silenced and denigrated because of racism and the normalization of it. So if we have those difficult conversations, then we get one step closer to dealing with the really nuanced and complicated ways that we need to address all of these issues.
I think we need to change our welfare system and our tax credit system, and I think that if we had a national guaranteed income for everyone, so many of our issues with poverty and disparity in services would be eliminated.
I can think of many things Canadians could do to create a better future for Canada, but one thing that I believe all Canadians are able to do at any given moment is to better understand one another, to imagine what other Canadians are going through, regardless of their geographic location, and try to empathize and connect with one another on that very human level. This is a huge country, and all of us are going through different stages of economic, social, demographic challenges and successes, and great times and bad times at the same time. And empathizing with one another and being there for one another is something we can all do.
So I would encourage all Canadians to join me in thinking about those of us who are vulnerable and less advantaged, in particular those individuals who belong to the LGBTQ community. I'd like to see us go out, embrace them, support them, and include them in the mainstream society.
We need all Canadians to take action on the recommendations put forward by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Canadians can find something in their heritage to celebrate, whether that's singing a song, telling a story, learning part of the language, just to upkeep our history and our heritage and celebrate it in the future.
Canada, if you want to make the country a better place, then let's start by honoring the original treaties of this land.
What Canada needs to do is to recognize and respect the Inuit in the north, because we have such unequal services in the north. You see, the Arctic is everything that Canada is not, or vice versa.
Volunteering, especially for young people, because when we volunteer, we gain the skills, experiences, and networks that we need to succeed. Many people think of volunteering as only benefiting others, but oftentimes, the greatest beneficiaries of our altruism is ourselves.
I think be open to new ideas and ideas that aren't necessarily ones that you've previously espoused, and try to engage with those ideas honestly and reasonably so that everyone is included in the discussion.
Canadians can grow some of their own food, support farmers through community-supported agriculture, and advocate for food and agricultural policy that really values farmers and then everyone else as eaters?
Well, I think my idea is that they should believe in something. I think that if you give your concentration, your concern, and your affection, your love, I suppose, to some part of what a large thing a country is, that this will provide a focus for you on where you want to go and what you want to do. I think anybody can believe in something, and I think that believing in something, finding something that is worthwhile, that's sufficiently deep or resonant or odd or stimulating, will lead you to see everything as a little more glittery and a little more exciting.
I think what Canadians should remember is we have an extraordinary history, and it's a history of a country being built on compromise and accommodation and recognition of diversity. Diversity is in the DNA of this country. So if you recognize that, you learn to listen to other people. You may not agree with them, but you listen and you're polite. You don't just rant. So the best thing Canadians could do would be to remember that and to listen as well as talk.
One thing that Canadians can do today is connect with someone from a different generation other than their own. And doing so, that contributes directly to the health of our economy and of our citizens.
Stand behind Indigenous-led solutions to Indigenous challenges that are facing communities in Canada today. And to challenge yourself when you feel that that's hard to do, because there's something deeper in some of the underlying reasons why you may not feel that that's the right position to take.
We need to question whose stories are being told and whose voices are missing. Those with power and making the key decisions don't know what's happening on the ground, and those who are marginalized don't have voices in those boardrooms.
So one thing that I really think Canadians could do right now would be to just be open-minded, because when we want change for our country in the future, I think being open-minded can be the first step for different changes, because we accept those changes and that's how we can be a prosperous country in the future.
We need to invest more in our people.
How about this? How about we all just love each other?
Stop complaining, lighten up, get creative, and make something good happen.
To learn the stories and histories of Indigenous people so that we're not constantly at odds with each other.
Travel a lot more and stop saying sorry so often.
I think we can pay attention to and begin to cherish our landscapes. I think that's one of the most important things about Canada, and also something that can unite us. We are in possession of one of the great wildernesses of the world, perhaps one of the last great wildernesses of the world. And one of the ways that we can begin to care about the environment of that wilderness is to learn it, understand it, see it, and come to love it.
We need to think inclusively. We need to make sure that when we're out there building our dreams, when we're building our lives, we need to include other people into our dreams, include them into our lives. We need to build a better Canada by making sure that we're all included at the table of Canada.
I think to make Canada a better country, we need to encourage everyday exploration, remind ourselves how much fun it is to be curious and to question without restraint, and to just have that wonder for the world around us. And I think by embracing everyday exploration, that's how we'll really start to solve the most pressing issues of our time and build resilient and sustainable communities. I think we can try and address sexism and systemic racism in my lifetime. That would make us a better country.
Well, we work in the area of child abuse, and right now we see way too much of it. And I think for us to be a better country, we need to make sure that no child suffers from any type of abuse, harassment, or bullying.
I think the one thing that Canadians can do today to make it a better country is to familiarize themselves with one treaty, or perhaps the history of one particular tribe or peoples that were here before them. Just one. Start there.
Believe that we are as good as anybody else in any other country, and that we can do anything in Canada.
Oh, I think that Canadians could start honoring and respecting their elders to make a better country, rather than choosing to ignore them or to treat them with condescension.